Hi, good afternoon. I'm Lou Eisen, and this is Ring Talk. Welcome here to my humble abode in Toronto on this blustery, rainy kind of afternoon I like, sort of mirrors my life here in Toronto. Today, we're going to talk about a very special fight, one of the first fights I learned about when I was a kid. This is one of the most controversial, if not the most controversial fight of all time. And this fight took place at the Vernon Arena in Vernon, California, on July 4th, 1912. It's amazing how many fights in the first part of the last century and before always took place on July 4th, the American birthday, Day of Independence. And it was supposed to be, this patriotic thing. You fight on July 4th for the people. This was a great fight. This was a highway robbery. And the fight was between world lightweight champion Ad Wolgast, the Michigan Wildcat, not to be confused with Stanley Ketchel, the Michigan Assassin. Ketchel was a middleweight, and Wolgast was a lightweight. Wolgast may be, including Fritzy Zivic and the mysterious Billy Smith and other guys, the single dirtiest fighter ever. He was essentially a thug and a bully and a miscreant masquerading as a fighter. He hit guys hundreds of times in the testicles during each fight. He'd headbutt them, he'd kick them, he'd elbow them. He'd use the laces of his gloves to try to cut their eyes out. He'd palm them. He'd use his thumb to try to poke their eye out. He'd use his thumb to twist and turn. When he hit you with a punch, he'd dig his thumb in there into your liver. And the only guy as dirty, if not dirtier than him, was the man he won the title from, battling Nelson. Oscar battling Nelson, who was known as the Durable Dane and, more appropriately, the Abysmal Brute. Today's fight, though, involves Ad Wolgast and the great Mexican Joe Rivers. Joe Rivers actually was of Spanish Indian descent, born in California. He was not actually Mexican, but, ethnicity sold back then as it does now. And he was called Mexican Joe Rivers. Rivers was a great fighter, and definitely should have been the undisputed world lightweight champion in this particular fight. He was a great fighter. It was basically, Rivers was one of the, there were so many great lightweights back then. The division was stacked. You had Leech Cross, a Jewish dentist from New York, who would knock your teeth out during a fight and then set them the next day. You had Owen Moran, tremendous puncher from Britain. Moran was a guy that was beating the hell out of Ad Wolgast, and Wolgast fouled him before he fought Joe Rivers, hit him in the testicles repeatedly. Wolgast did this in all of his fights, and he always got away with it. And he got away with it for one reason. His employee was a well-known referee named Jack Welch. Welch was on the tape, and criminal referee, and Welch, not in every fight, but many fights involving Wolgast, and he would take money from Wolgast to ensure that Wolgast won. Now, this particular fight was because Wolgast was the lightweight champ. He'd won it in a 40-round bloodbath he won it before on a bloodbath to battling Nelson. He destroyed him in 40 rounds. Nelson was never the same again. So coming up on this fight, July 4th, 1912, at the Vernon Arena, you had Mexican Joe Rivers. The fight, Wolgast wanted to have the fight in Michigan, where he was from, because he thought it was better for him, and he had his friends there on his side. The fight was scheduled for California. Rivers had a big following there, and he wanted Jack Eaton as the referee, but Rivers wanted that. But because Wolgast was the champ, it was the champion's prerogative back then to choose the referee, and he chose the house referee, Jack Welch, meaning that, Wolgast could have come in with a hammer and hit him in the knees and kneecapped him, and Welch would not have called it. Never did. And in fact, when Welch refereed the fight where Nelson fought Joe Gans, the great Joe Gans, for 42 rounds, Gans won on a disqualification after Nelson hit him low hundreds of times. Finally, Welch, after being threatened by so many people, ended the fight. So when you look at the career of all these guys, I mean, it's amazing when you think of how many rounds they fought. I just made a note here that both of these men, Nelson fought from May 5th, 1898 to April 17th, 1917, and Wolgast fought from June 1906 to September 1920. The amount of rounds that each guy fought was just unbelievable. Nelson fought 132 bouts, and he fought 1,254 rounds. Think about that, 1,254 rounds. Wolgast fought 138 bouts, and he fought 1,123 rounds. Now, when he beat Richmond, or he beat Nelson, for the title at Port Richmond Arena, California, the referee was Eddie Smith. He was giving Nelson a brutal beating, and Nelson's eyes were closed. He still wanted to continue, but he was a beat man, and he could have easily been killed. So the referee, Eddie Smith, stopped the fight. He was in fear, and he was probably right that Nelson would have been killed. So we come up to the fight with Mexican Joe Rivers, and this was an incredible fight because Rivers was a great fighter. He was much more skilled than Wolgast. Wolgast had no defense at all. It didn't occur to him that he didn't know what defense was. This was an illiterate street kid from a large German family in Michigan, and he didn't know what defense was. To him, defense was blocking punches with his face. And to him, it was worth it. I'll block 15 with my face to get 1 or 2 in on you. And while the referee's breaking us up from a clinch, I'll headbutt you, step on your feet, hit you in your testicles. And he did that repeatedly until he wore guys down. He had a lot more stamina, obviously, when he was younger. And this worked up to a point. But fighters who fight in that all-out style that take 3 or 4 shots to give 1, it's an exciting style, but it has a very limited shelf life. And so we come around to their fight, and Rivers was a younger man, more skilled, better fighter. And Rivers grew up, as I said, in California. Everyone loved Joe Rivers in California. He was boxing professionally at 16, 17. Within 3 years at 20, he was a world contender, and he was considered to be the top guy in the welterweight or lightweight division. And there were a lot of great fighters back then in the lightweight division. So Rivers is getting ready for this fight. He's training hard. Wolgast trains, but Wolgast trains like Wolgast always trains. He does what he wants. He's not concentrating on anything specifically in training. He doesn't take training too seriously because he's fighting, 20, 30, 40 times a year. So he's always in shape. And in fact, both of them came in at under the 135 limit. I think Rivers was 132 and a half, and Wolgast was 133 and a half. So for the fight, for the first, several rounds, Rivers is beating the hell out of Wolgast, and easily so, because Rivers is a much more talented fighter. Wolgast isn't coming in and setting his shots up. He's not, he was the exact polar opposite of Alexander Usyk in his magnificent win yesterday over Anthony Joshua. You could see that Wolgast had no plans. He just came in windmilling with his arms, and wherever his punches landed, so be it. So didn't care about the rules, didn't care about fouling people, and he didn't have to because Jack Welch was never going to warn him and never going to take a point away or even disqualify him. And the interesting thing about that is with this particular fight is he committed hundreds of fouls during this fight. He kept hitting Rivers low, and the audience was getting angry. And Rivers would just look, or Jack Welch, the referee, said later, I didn't see anything, didn't see any fouls of any sort. And he was paid not to see. Can you imagine a conflict of interest today to know that a referee for a fight today would be on a fighter's payroll? So Welch was a terrible referee. He was the Lawrence Cole of referees of his time. He was openly corrupt, and he let Wolgast get away with anything during that fight. So in the early rounds, Rivers is dancing around Wolgast, and he's like a matador. Wolgast is running in face first, Rivers is sidestepping him and just pounding him to the face. And when Wolgast tries to hold and hit, Rivers is giving it back to him. And he's pounding him to the body and pounding him in the face. And he's giving Wolgast a terrible beating. You know, Joe Levy, who was the manager of Mexican Joe Rivers, the interesting thing here is he didn't care about the referee. Like when they said, well, it's not going to be your guy, Charles Eaton, it'll be Jack Welch. Now, he knew Jack Welch was in the pocket of Ad Wolgast. Why didn't he say anything? You think he would have stood up for his fighter? He said it makes no difference because back then, the talent disparity between Rivers and Wolgast was thought to be so great that doesn't matter who the referee was, Rivers would knock him out in 5 or 6 rounds. And that's not only what Levy thought, that's what everyone else thought, you know, who was writing about the fight, boxing aficionados, other fighters. They thought this would be a walkover for Mexican Joe Rivers. And for the first part of the fight, it was. He was pounding the hell out of Ad Wolgast. He was closing his eyes, broke his nose. Apparently, he broke his nose early in the first round, and blood kept gushing out, and Wolgast just didn't give a damn. Kept coming forward, kept taking a beating, kept landing his punches. You'd have to wonder, he's thinking, where is this getting me? I'm getting the hell kicked out of me, and I'm not winning these rounds. And it was generally agreed that, you know, after the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, you know, you're looking into the 9th round, and Wolgast is behind 8 rounds. And this was supposed to be a 20-round fight, which a lot of fights were then, 20-round fights or 45-round fights in this blistering heat in California. And that's a long distance to go, 3-minute rounds. Especially if, and Rivers thought, I'm not going to worry about Wolgast because his fouls will only get him in trouble and they won't work against me because I'm able to minimize it. What Rivers didn't account for, of course, being so young, but still a veteran, was the physical impact of Wolgast's fouls, of getting hit in the testicles under his athletic supporter hundreds of times, not dozens, but hundreds. Getting elbowed in the eye, getting thumbed in the eye, getting your feet stamped on, getting headbutted on your nose and on your lips, having him take his thumb, try to take your eye out, hits you to the liver, takes his thumb and twists the punch. So he didn't account for the beating and how much physical abuse he was going to take. Everyone, including his manager Joe Levy, everyone was yelling at Jack Welch, but Welch just ignored them all. And this was a one-sided fight. It'd be like watching Roberto Duran early in his title reign. He was just pounding the hell out of Ad Wolgast. The crowd was very pro-Rivers, though they gave Wolgast a great ovation when he was introduced as the champion before the fight, although they gave a greater one to Joe Rivers as a challenger. And he was just taking this feral beating, and it was just a matter of time till Joe Rivers was going to knock out Ad Wolgast and win the undisputed world lightweight title. Now, it's interesting. They call it the double knockout, the famous double knockout, where they both land a shot at the same time. They both go down, and yet one guy is declared a winner. That's not quite what happened. But what's interesting to note is I think it was the 8th or 9th round where this happened, same thing that happened in the 13th round, happened 4 rounds earlier. They both connected with right hands. They both went down. And this has happened recently. It's happened then. It's happened all throughout boxing history. And Jack Welch, the referee, didn't do anything. He did the right thing. He stood back, and both fighters regained their feet before the count of 10 and resumed the fight. So where is the controversy? Well, there's several controversies. You have Wolgast coming into the fight as one of the dirtiest fighters of his era, and you have Rivers coming into the fight known as a slugger, known as a good fighter, a smart fighter, more of a hard puncher than a knockout power in both hands. Whereas Wolgast, would wear you down over time. So we get to the 13th round, fatal 13th round. And there are people at ringside, not only the fans, but the boxing officials, the timekeeper and other people, and newspaper reporters and other fighters and their managers. They're all there, and they see the fight. They're only a couple of feet away sitting at ringside. And earlier in the round, Wolgast keeps landing these low blows. He'd been doing it all fight with his right hand. Keep right hands to the testicles. He would use his left hand too, but mostly his right hand. And you can get a tape of this on YouTube. The problem is the tape is from behind Joe Rivers. So it's hard to, there was no side view as far as we know. So it's hard to get a good look at precisely, exactly for sure, categorically, of what happened. But what the people at ringside said, the newspaper people and the ring officials said, what happened was this. The fighters were this close. They were clinching. Wolgast was losing the fight. He knew he was losing the fight. 13th round, he was behind. His own corner said, you're going to lose the title. You got to knock him out. And there was no way he was going to knock him out because Rivers was strong and fresh. And so what Wolgast did was he threw a right hand as hard as he could, and he hit Rivers in his right or his left testicle. And Rivers, as he's falling out of reflex, throws a right hand and hits Wolgast. Now, some people ringside said Wolgast had used a left hook to the testicles. The first person to hit the mat is Mexican Joe Rivers from the foul blow. He goes down. On the way down, as I said, he hit Wolgast. Wolgast has a momentary delayed reaction for a second or two, and then the shot to the chin takes effect, and he falls on top. So you have a big problem. You got one fighter lying on the other fighter. And boxing says that you have to get up under your own strength. You cannot get up with the help of someone in your corner, the referee, or anyone else. You have to get up under your own ability. And so what happens is, it's near the end of the round, Jack Welch, in order to save Ad Wolgast and his hold on the lightweight title, he grabs Wolgast and lifts him up. He lifts him up and sort of pushes him to the other corner. And then when Joe Rivers gets up, the timekeeper gets Jack Welch's attention. And he says, the round is over. And the round ended as Jack Welch had counted 4 over Mexican Joe Rivers. Never should have happened because he shouldn't have helped Wolgast up. The fight should have been stopped. But there was no one above Welch at ringside who had the power to do that. So Wolgast is in his corner. Rivers is up. He's in agonizing pain, but he's up at 4. He said, I can continue. I got up under my own strength. I can continue. And once again, the official timekeeper is saying to Welch, Jack, he got up at the count of 4, and Welch should stop the count. You know, he went on 4, 5, 6, and the timekeeper said, it's over. The round is over. And so Welch didn't know what to do because Rivers is up. He beat the count, and he points. You know, there's a delay there for a while, and he points to Wolgast and raises his hand. And the audience goes berserk. Joe Levy gets in the ring and starts screaming at Welch. This is the biggest robbery in the history of prize fighting. You should be lynched for this. And when Welch, he knows what he's done is patently illegal. So he goes over to Wolgast's corner and he says to him, get him out of here now. Now. And his corner, you know, Wolgast was knocked out. His corner carries the groggy fighter and runs to the dressing room where they put him in a car or whatever and just get him out. They get him out of the arena. Welch needs a police escort. As Welch is trying to leave the ring, one of the guys in charge of the boxing commission in California was this huge lawyer. And he said, you're not getting away with that. You were paid to do this. This was corrupt and you know it. He said, your guy fouled Rivers the whole fight. And he won on a foul, and you helped him win. You're not supposed to do that. And Rivers, or Welch, of course, said, I didn't see a foul. I didn't see Rivers or Welch commit one foul. And it's ridiculous. I mean, he saw hundreds of fouls. He ignored them. He was known for that. He didn't expect the audience to be that angry where people were throwing stuff at him, you know. And he had at one point had to say, well, I haven't made my final decision, you know, to buy himself time. And then he is escorted by quite a few police and security people, and he has to leave the arena literally with people chasing after him. They want to kill him, and for good reason. What he did was corrupt and criminal. He awarded the fight to the man that had been knocked out. And people were outraged. And in the paper the next day, in the San Francisco Call, there was an article, which I have in my book, which will hopefully be coming out soon, Boxing's Greatest Controversies, Blunders, Blood Feuds, and Bad Decisions. I cover this particular fight. And the guy in the call said that, yes, Ad Wolgast had claimed that Joe Rivers had kneed him. And he said he did. He said after Wolgast hit him in the testicles, his knee reflexively came up. But he said it barely touched Wolgast. And as he's going down, he throws the right hand, and that drops Wolgast. And he's out. And Welsh should have stood back. If Welsh had stood back and not done anything, eventually Joe Rivers would have got up. He would have pushed Wolgast off, and he would have gotten up. Here's the thing. After 12 rounds, before the final 13th round, most people agreed that Rivers had won at least 11 to 12 rounds. He was pitching a shutout. He was beating the hell out of Ad Wolgast. There's no way on earth this fight should have been decided in that particular way. But it was. And here's one of the ironies, of course. So this is 1912, July 4th. Wolgast eventually loses the title in a brutal beatdown to Willie Ritchie. And he got disqualified. And the reason he got disqualified is because the referee was not Jack Welch. And I believe the referee was a gentleman named Griffin, who I wrote down. Yeah, Jim Griffin was the referee for that fight. And then, of course, after he beats Ad Wolgast for the title, Willie Ritchie then destroys Mexican Joe Rivers. I said Mexican Joe Rivers, and is the preeminent lightweight of his era. But until Benny Leonard comes along. Both men were never the same again. They fought again a couple more times, and I believe some were newspaper decisions. One was given to Wolgast. But Nelson, battling Nelson was the guy that sort of started this fracas, so Nelson was the one who lost the title originally to Wolgast. Nelson was a terrible guy in his own right. He used to bathe in his own urine. So when you get a clinch with him, you'd almost retch. So Wolgast and Nelson didn't like each other. The problem with Wolgast, and this happened to Nelson, Wolgast gets the victory stolen for him by Jack Welch against Joe Rivers, July 4th, 1912. But he was showing the first signs of dementia. Now you have to understand something. When you look at these guys, they're not old guys. Now I'd written down the ages here of how old each fighter was, and Wolgast was a young guy. So Wolgast was born 1888 and February 8th, and he died April 14th, 1955. Now this is what you have to know. By 1915, 2 or 3 years later, his dementia is really coming out. By 1917, he's done. He's got such bad dementia that from 1917 to 1955, he has to be hospitalized in a mental institution, in a sanitarium, because his pugilistic dementia is so strong that he doesn't know who he is and he doesn't know where he is. And his fighting style of taking hundreds of punches, he had no defense whatsoever, was really what worked against him over his career and over his life. Fighters coming up like that didn't have amateur fighters or the amateur ranks or coaches to help train them. Guys like Wolgast had to train and learn from fighters that he fought or guys that he met in the gym. And he was able to pick up things, but most of what he picked up was foul tactics. No one ever showed him, how to slip a punch or to slide under a punch and then counter the guy. He didn't do that. That wasn't his thing. He didn't know how to do that. I mean, he would have stared at you, and his mindset was the same as battling Nelson, who also ended up with severe dementia. His mindset was, if you slip a punch or you slide under it or you block it, you're a sissy. You're less than a man. Because a real man, and this is what most people thought right up until Ali beat Liston, and including that fight. Most guys in boxing thought a real man takes a punch. And as Ray Leonard would say, no, a real idiot takes a punch. You don't gain anything by, taking a shot. And because Nelson was throwing windmill shots, Wolgast was throwing windmill punches, as well as Nelson, they had no balance. So when Wolgast got hit to the chin and to the head, he wasn't balanced properly to diffuse the power of the shot through his legs. He was taking every shot directly on his skull and moving his brain around. And, almost 1,200 rounds of getting hit hundreds and hundreds of times in the head every fight. You can imagine he was literally a vegetable by the end of it. And he still had guys like Larney, Lichtenstein, and other guys trying to get him fights near the end. In 1917, trying to get him fights. And he would stand there and people knew who he was. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know where he was. And they'd watch him take a beating. They'd watch him get the hell pounded out of him, but they'd applaud him because he was able to stand there and take a beating for 10 rounds. That's not sport. How is that sport? The bell starts, you just stand there, and the other guy hits you in the head for 10 rounds, 20 rounds, and you last. Last night I was watching the fight between Sergey Lipinets and Omar Figueroa. And I'm a big fan of Omar Figueroa Jr. He's a real gentleman. He was a great champion. But there's a point where I'm watching this with some friends and we're thinking, what's going on here? The guy's a shot fighter. His father's got to stop this before he gets seriously injured. He no longer has it. There's nothing wrong with that. But he was smart enough to realize that. Because Wolgast had never had money, he lived hand to mouth, as all fighters did. So he died destitute, as did Mexican Trollburgers, as did Battling Nelson, as did most of them. One of the very few that lived beyond their career was Benny Leonard, and that's because he put defense first. He was the anomaly. He was the guy that wasn't going to stand and go toe-to-toe with you. He put a premium on defense, and he could stick a move, and he could knock you out. He'd slug with you, but he wasn't going to take your shots, stand there purposely and take your shots. And, of course, the ironic thing is Benny Leonard died of a heart attack at age 46 in St. Nicholas Arena in New York while refereeing a fight. So that's kind of sad. That was 1947, I believe. But when we get back to Wolgast and Rivers, it never died down. People still talked about it. They still talk about it today. As I said, they had a rematch, and it went to a no decision. A lot of these guys, when you look at the record, there'll be a certain number of fights, and you'll see that 132 bouts for Ad Wolgast, and 59 wins, 20 KOs he had, 22 draws. And you think, well, that's doesn't add up to 132. But a lot of these were newspaper decisions where the newspaper would say who they thought won the fight after. And so they would agree beforehand to fight. The title doesn't change hands unless you knock the guy down or you knock him out. So in this case, it didn't happen. Rivers should have been able to knock Wolgast down, and they did have a double knockout earlier in the fight. Rivers won the fight. He was ahead by 12 rounds, and everyone pretty well agreed, especially Wolgast's corner, that if this fight had gone on, for another round or two, Rivers would have definitely stopped Wolgast. But Wolgast, like a lot of fighters, was so desperate that he threw a low blow. He was doing it the whole fight, and this time he thought, I have nothing to lose. And there were people at ringside that said he did it with his left hand. Other people said he used a knee. But the 4 doctors in attendance for the California State Athletic Commission all examined Joe Rivers after the fight, his athletic supporter, and his testicles, and they agreed he was hit by a punch in his testicles, which really severely dented the athletic supporter and gave him, almost ruptured his testicles. So he was in excruciating pain. This happened when Ken Buchanan lost his title incorrectly to Roberto Duran, when Duran hit him under the belt, low after the bell, which was ridiculous. So same thing here. after these fights, the men have divergent careers. Joe Rivers goes on, and Joe Rivers keeps fighting. But as he keeps fighting, he's doing well, but he doesn't really ever get another title shot. They know how good he is. They're not going to give him a chance. I keep saying Nelson. Wolgast keeps fighting, and he doesn't get another title shot. He's fighting really good fighters, and he's losing most of the time. And from 1917 on, he was committed to a mental institution. It's sad because he dies all alone, and he spent 35, 38 years alone, in the fog, misty memories of his mind. As I said, he didn't know who he was, where he was, or what he was. But when he died, at the funeral, there was an article and there was a photo of a tiny little guy in rumpled, well-worn clothes who came to pay his respects in Milwaukee. And the man had come from California, and that man was Mexican Joe Rivers. As he said after, and it takes a big man to say this, he said, it was never personal with Ad and I. That's just the way he fought. I didn't hold it against him. It was the referee who made the mistake. That's the way I'd fought, and you either accepted it or didn't accept it. So you can see in that particular respect that Rivers, was the bigger man. The fact that their careers were incredibly long. I mean, if you look at Wolgast's career, Wolgast 1906 to 1920, I believe. So that's a long, long time. And Nelson fought on till I think Wolgast, Rivers fought on till around the same time period. Battling Nelson fought on to 1917. And these guys were great fighters. They were dirty fighters except for Joe Rivers. They gave the fans everything they wanted. These are little guys, 133 to 135 pounds, who could put 15, 20,000, 30,000 people in the arena, and it would sell out tickets because they were exciting fighters. And, one reason why they wouldn't disqualify Nelson or Wolgast earlier in a fight, especially Wolgast in his earlier fights, was because fans could hardly afford the tickets. Tickets were expensive. And so most fans were people from the lower middle class and made very little money. And fighters made in one fight, which the same amount these guys made in a year or 2 years or 3 years. So, a man with a family and a job and kids had to save up for over a year just to go see this title fight. So you didn't want to disqualify a guy, even if it was an egregious foul, which it was with Wolgast, because guy spent all this money, and now because this is going on, he wasted his money. Plus, he probably made a side bet, with someone, and because it was ended under such controversy, all the bets were called off. So whatever money you bet as a fan, you're not going to get it now. That money's lost, as well as the money you paid for a ticket. So this fight lost boxing a lot of fans, and it took the state of California, a good 30, 40 years to win those fans back. It helped a lot with Jimmy McLarnin, in the late 20s, early 30s, but it wasn't until the 50s, 60s that the state of California and boxing really started to come around and gain back a lot of the lost fans. And those fans were lost because people passed it on that if you go to a fight, you're going to get screwed. A fighter can do whatever he wants to win, and whoever's winning, if you're winning, doesn't make a difference. It's up to the corrupt person in charge to decide the victor. And the fans had enough. And because of that, it was tough for these fighters to get good money. They never really fought for big money again. And when I say big money, I think Wolgast got 20 grand and Rivers got 2 grand, which was a lot of money, but 20 grand. Plus, Wolgast got a part of the concessions, part of the film rights. So that was good money coming in. Unfortunately for Wolgast, he got used to, like a lot of poor people, living high off the hog, and it came back to haunt him because at the end of his career, he had no money. And that was unfortunate. So some people, when I've mentioned this fight, say to me, well, whatever happened to Jack Welch? He's what Joe Frazier would call a scambooga, a rogue, a criminal, terrible ref. So what happened to Jack Welch? After this fight in 1912, he refereed 4 more times. He couldn't referee any more Wolgast fights because people just, fighters would say, managers, well, you can use Jack Welch, but we're not fighting you. It's happened. Sorry, look for someone else to sucker. And so Welch, one of the last 4 fights he ever did was a Jack Johnson fight with Jess Willard, to which Welch actually said, if it was a 20-round fight, Johnson wins 17 rounds to 3. I mean, he was killing the guy and just ran out of steam, but that's a story for another day. But it affected Welch's career. It adversely affected Ad Wolgast's career, but it also adversely affected Joe Rivers, not just physically, but mentally, because he always had that stigma that he was winning the title, but he had it stolen from him. And then to go up against a guy like Willie Ritchie, who savagely beat him down. And then you have to think, I was this close to being the world champion, and now there's a new champion, and it's just not going to happen. You can get this fight on YouTube. People still discuss this fight. People still say, well, what happened? Who should have won? Clearly, Ad Wolgast had cheated through his compatriot, referee Jack Welch. Clearly, when they both hit the canvas, first of all, Wolgast should have been disqualified many times before, but that just wasn't going to happen with Jack Welch ever. After that, when they both went down for the second time around 13, Welch should have stood back. And as it says in the boxing rules back then and today, you got to get up under your own power. And Wolgast didn't do that. You could actually see Welch helping him up and then continue the count. And, of course, there was the controversy because Rivers also beat the count and didn't get the benefit of the doubt. Welch, I got to do something. I can't cheat my guy because he's not going to pay me. So my guy wins. And they literally, Welch and Wolgast had to leave the arena with cars literally following them, with people wanting to stop them and lynch them. It was one of the craziest moments in boxing history. I would say easily or arguably the most controversial fight ever to take place in boxing that I know of. The double knockout. Please go to YouTube and watch this fight, and then let me know what you think at Eisen@Rogers.com. Also, as I said, my book will be coming out soon, Boxing's Greatest Mysteries, and I'll have an update on that in a couple of weeks and let you know. And I want to thank Eric Boyce for doing a great job of producing this particular show. And I think that's it for this episode. I hope you all enjoyed another edition of Ring Talk. I'm boxing historian and writer Lou Eisen, and I think next week I'll try to do something on battling Nelson, because I've been mentioning him by accident so often during this podcast that maybe I should just go ahead and talk about his fight with Joe Gans next week, which I think I will do. We'll talk about the Joe Gans battling Nelson, the 42-round fight in Colma, California, under tremendous heat. And at that point, Gans was already suffering from tuberculosis. But that is next Sunday's podcast. Thank you for watching. I'm Lou Eisen, and I hope you have a great rest of your Sunday. And always please support the great sport of boxing. Thank you.